Hello, my friend, and welcome back to the Meadowsweet Money podcast. I'm your host and shame-free money mentor, Mimi Cirbusova. Today's episode is a little longer than usual, but for a very good reason. I had the sincere pleasure of chatting with Rosie, an artist, writer, and de-influencer. The first time I came across Rosie's content on TikTok, I noticed that what she was sharing was very different from other de-influencing videos across the internet. She's not here to be on a moral high horse, and she's certainly not trying to shame you into never spending any money. Rather, her videos are trying to normalize slowing down, spending mindfully, and making incremental changes in order to stand up for ourselves, our communities, and the planet, while also acknowledging the systemic challenges that we face in that pursuit. I know that you're going to love this conversation. And I have to thank my wonderful Patreon supporters. This interview is ad-free and uninterrupted because of their support. Thank you so much, patrons. All right, without further ado, let's dive right in. Hi, Rosie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for being here. And I just want to start off by saying I love your content so much. It really brings such like a sunshine feeling to my soul every time I see what you put out there. So thank you for doing what you do.
That's
I
so
want to start off
sweet.
with
Thank you.
saying, we've had a little bit of a conversation previously, and I want to introduce you and my audience to each other. So I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself, what you do, just tell people who you are.
Sure. So hi, my name's Rosie. I go online by Circe's Pork Roast, which is just a silly little name that I picked in high school that I didn't realize was going to kind of become my entire online identity, but it's fine. I am a writer and an artist. I do graphic design and I design jewelry. I run an Etsy store and a small business where I just pins, stickers, jewelry, fun little things. And I also, like I said, I'm a writer. I have done work in journalism and in fiction. And lately I've really gotten into making sort of like mini video essays and video content on TikTok, which is what's really taken off. So I consider myself to be a de-influencer, which is the polar opposite of an influencer. Try to influence people to resist being influenced and to shop mindfully and to shop for themselves and not just buy things that people told them to buy. So that's kind of what my content is about.
I love that you're talking about that because that's how I found you. I stumbled on a video that you had put out there on TikTok, and you were talking about spending. I think you were in a store or something, and you were talking about spending mindfully, and you were talking about like, hey, I don't really need this thing, even though it's cute and I like it, but I have something like this at home. And that word de-influencing, I know so many of us know what an influencer is, but maybe aren't familiar with what a de-influencer is. So can you tell us, like, what does that mean? Why do you think it's becoming more popular, or why do you think it's so prominent now to just say, let's get out of this consumer culture that's so toxic and yucky?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did not coin the phrase de-influencer. I wish I knew who did, but it's a phrase I started seeing about a year ago or so online, mostly in the context of de-influencing. And basically it exists as a sort of opposite response to influencer culture. And we all know what influencers are. Influencers have really exploded in the past 5 or so years in a way that they did not exist when I was a teenager on the internet. It really just feels like influencers and the culture of influencers are absolutely everywhere now. And I think that that's really the reason why this de-influencing movement really took off and why so many people are responding to it, it's because so much more of the internet now is a mall, basically, than it ever used to be. I remember when I was a teenager on the internet, there were designated spaces on the internet where you would be shopping for stuff. And then there was the rest of the internet, where there was all sorts of other types of content and all sorts of other types of stuff that had nothing to do with buying things. And there were occasionally content creators online, although we didn't even really call them content creators back then. That wasn't really a phrase yet. And I kind of hate the phrase content creator because it just feels it feels very capitalism to me. But I remember back then, it would be once in a while, somebody would maybe take a brand deal and promote something on their channel. But it was much rarer, and you had to be very successful in order for brands to reach out to you. And it was also pretty easy to avoid that type of content because the majority of people creating content on the internet were not getting brand deals at all. And so that's kind of how it was back then. But nowadays, it's really unavoidable. Nowadays, you go online and it feels like everyone's trying to sell you something. I've heard a lot of people say that after the introduction of TikTok Shop, TikTok started to feel like QVC. I would argue that it was even before the introduction of TikTok Shop that it started to feel like that. And it's not just TikTok, it's everywhere. Every social media platform now, everyone is trying to sell you something. Every brand is doing it, and they're all reaching out to influencers who are, super famous with millions of followers, but they're also reaching out to what's called micro influencers now. So anybody can be an influencer. And it feels very dystopian to me. This world of everybody who gets even a little bit of sort of leverage online is able to use that leverage to then start selling basically crap to other people and getting paid for it. And I'm saying that as somebody who, now that I do have a, moderate following on TikTok, I have also been getting, you just start getting these notifications and messages and stuff. It almost feels like they're from bots trying to get you to promote these just garbage products, just the most random things. It's like, here's a random necklace shaped like a cross. Here's a deodorizer for your pet's litter bowl. Here's a silicone shower head. Here's it just is the most random of things. It does feel like every corner of the internet now has been infested sort of with influencing culture. It's really just completely unavoidable. And so I think that people are really sick of it. I think that people are really sick of not being able to go anywhere online anymore without feeling like people are selling you something. It's not just that. I think that people are also really disgusted with the amount of just wastefulness that they see online as well. That for me was a big part of sort of joining the de-influencing movement, was seeing all of these videos from, I call them overconsumption influencers. That's not their official name, but that's how I refer to them. Influencers where basically their entire content, everything that they make is just look at all of the products that I own. That's what their content is. And those people really exploded in the past few years online. It's so funny to me that people actually watch those and find that aspirational, because I watch stuff like that and my immediate response is just disgust. This is so much garbage. It's so much trash. And also just as somebody who is constantly trying to sort of declutter my home, because I am a little bit of a pack rat. I'm the type of person who's I can't get rid of this. What if it's useful in 3 years? It's...
I empathize with you there.
Yeah. For me, having that many things is just something that immediately gives me this stress response. And so I think that a lot of people also had that reaction to it, where they were looking at this massive overconsumption and realizing that not only is this super unsustainable for the planet, it's also just kind of gross, It's just kind of sad behavior to have so much of your life revolve around buying more and more and more things. And so I think that those, things combined, just the rise of these overconsumption influencers and this sort of flaunting of massive overspending and overconsumption, and then also combined with how being sold to feels inescapable on the internet. I think that those things together are really why people are turning to the concept of de-influencing.
One of the things that drew me to your videos and to your content specifically is I've seen other de-influencing content, and so much of it is based on strictly what's good for the planet. Obviously, like you just said, this kind of overconsumption culture is horrible for our planet and horrible for the environment. But I think what you specifically talk about and the things that I love and admire about your content is that you're looking at it more holistically. One of the things that you create that's so cool are these what you call no-buy shopping trips.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious how your perspective on shopping has changed, because I think so many times we feel like if we're trying to reduce our consumption, that means that we can't go out into the world and go shopping.
Yeah.
But your shopping trips look very different. So can you talk a little bit more about your no-buy shopping trips and how your perspective on shopping has changed?
Yeah, absolutely. So to answer sort of the first part of that question, like, yes, I definitely do see it as a sort of holistic thing. I'm somebody who has always been very passionate about the environment. I was raised on like Studio Ghibli movies, and Wall-E was like one of my favorite movies as a kid. So obviously I grew up into somebody who cared a lot about the fate of our planet and nature and sustainability and all of that stuff. But it is true that I really see it as only one of the many reasons why people should de-influence themselves and shop more mindfully. And I think that a lot of people who are like trying to get people to shop more mindfully maybe turn some people away by only focusing on the sort of like moral and ethical problems behind it. It is kind of, unfortunate to say this, but it's hard to get people on board with something when the only argument that you have is, I know this thing is fun for you, but it's ethically and morally bad.
I'm really glad that you said that, because it's so difficult to get people behind your core message if all it is like, hey, you're a bad person or you're doing something immoral if
Yeah,
you're taking this action that you kind of actually really get a lot of pleasure out of.
exactly. For example, I don't buy fast fashion anymore, like at all, with very occasional exceptions of like, I needed a new sports bra, so I got one at like Marshall's, like very, very, very occasional exceptions. But for the most part, I get everything either from independent brands or secondhand. Most of it's secondhand. And I feel very strongly about not supporting fast fashion. But, I've been trying to get people to give up fast fashion for years, and it's really hard when all you have to say to them is, well, it's bad for the planet and it's, it exploits people, because it is hard to give up the small joys that we have when we live in a capitalistic hellscape nightmare where we have to grab onto whatever, joys we can find. And I understand that and I empathize with that. And so I kind of realized after a while that like it was actually much more effective for me to kind of shift my goal away from just trying to get people to stop buying fast fashion and instead try to get people to understand why buying secondhand and, buying small is great and not just better for the planet and for you morally, but is also just like better in every way. Like I have much better clothes now since I stopped buying fast fashion. I really do feel like in order to get people on board with this as a concept, we have to look at it as something that affects not just the world around us, but also ourselves. Because I do feel like de-influencing myself, because that's how I talk about it in my videos, like I'm de-influencing myself. Like I feel like it has really made my life better in a lot of ways. And so the second part of your question about the sort of no-buy shopping trips, they have definitely changed the way that I shop, and I would say absolutely for the better. One of the things that I started realizing after I started making these videos, which was, I think the first de-influencing shopping video that I made was, I think in like last December. And so when I first made that video, and then I, kept making more of these, come shopping with me, but we're shopping mindfully. And then eventually I introduced more recently these like no buy shopping videos. What I started realizing is that I actually had the impulse to buy things less. My desire to make impulse purchases has actually gone down without me even really having to keep reminding myself that. Like, when I first started out, it was occasionally difficult to see something that I really liked and have to leave it behind. But the more I, sort of repeated these scripts in my mind, that I would say in my videos of like, well, I like this thing, but I don't really have space for it at home. I like this thing, but I have another thing that's actually very similar to this, so I don't need two of them. I like this thing, but I don't like it enough for me to pay $15 for it. And I started saying these things to myself in my videos, the more they just started to appear in my head without me having to think about it. And I recently created a worksheet, a de-influencing worksheet. And basically the worksheet is questions you ask yourself when you're considering buying something. And I just based it off of like, these are all the questions that I ask myself, when I'm trying to decide whether or not to buy something. And the questions are all, just meant to be things that make you just kind of slow down and really think about like how much value this is going to add to your life and whether it's worth taking up space in your home. And the idea with it is that, once you've used the worksheet enough times, you don't need it anymore, that those thoughts just appear in your head naturally. And that's kind of what's happened to me. The other thing I realized is that when we think of like shopping and we think of wanting to cut back on spending, a lot of people, including myself at first, think that that means you have to just get rid of shopping altogether, which is hard because a lot of us get a pretty good like dopamine hit from shopping, And again, like, when we live in a capitalist nightmare world, we all have to find our dopamine wherever we can. And so it's really hard to just completely give up something that, brings us joy or that's, we find relaxing. And I know that, for a lot of people, it's like, but I don't want to give up my little Target trips. I don't want to give up my little, trips to TJ Maxx or whatever.
Right.
And so what I've sort of realized after starting to make these videos is that you don't have to. You can still go to these shops and you can still get the same dopamine hits without spending as much money or without spending any money at all. And the way that I kind of came to realize that was by really sitting down and thinking about, okay, when I go into a store and I go shopping, where is the dopamine coming from? What specifically are the things that I find enjoyable about this? Obviously, there's, the big one at the end. There's the purchasing of the product and then having the product. But a lot of the time, the most fun you'll ever have with that product is the moment you buy it, right? Like,
right.
I've heard a lot of other people say that, especially with like, you wait for weeks for your online purchase or whatever, and then it gets there and you open it up and it's so exciting. And then you never get the same dopamine as that moment when you first unbox it. Right. And that's what I'm trying to avoid is that like, big moment of like, we did it. We got the fun thing. Now the dopamine's gone. And so I started thinking like, what are the other parts of shopping that are fun? And I realized that at least for me, and this is going to be different for everybody, but for me, I just like looking at stuff and like searching for cool things is really fun. And one of the reasons that I think that my urge to buy things went down when I started making these videos, I kind of accidentally realized that another way I was getting my dopamine from this was actually through the creation of the videos, because it was me finding a cool thing and then showing other people and being like, isn't this thing cool? And then we get to share in that excitement together.
Right.
And obviously, like, not everybody is going to make shopping vlogs or whatever. But once I kind of realized that that was another way that I was sort of getting dopamine during these shopping trips without actually spending any money at all, I realized that I could replicate in other ways. I could bring a friend with me and then we can both look at this stuff and be like, isn't this fun? And they go, oh my gosh, yes, that's so cute. And then I put it back. Or I could just take pictures of stuff and I could text them to my friends and be like, look what I found at the store. Isn't this cute? And so in that way, I'm still able to get that excitement from discovering a fun little thing without having to actually purchase it. And I feel like this is especially true when it comes to thrift stores or vintage stores, like stores where it feels more like a treasure hunt, and you never know what you're going to find when you're there. But this can also be true of, going to places like TJ Maxx or going to places like Target or whatever, like anywhere. It's almost like, it reminds me of like show and tell as a kid, like
Right.
fun moment of like being able to hold up your shiny rock to the class and be like, look at my shiny rock I found. And everyone goes, ooh, yay.
Yay.
And that's kind of like the moment I'm trying to capture. And so I think that in itself is a way you can have fun while shopping without spending anything at all. So when I go on these like no-buy shopping trips, like I'm really trying to just find all of the fun, find the dopamine in shopping, in every part of shopping except for the spending money. And obviously, if you watch my videos, most of them are not no buys. I only started doing these like no buy shopping trip videos more recently, but in most of the videos I do end up buying something, but I always try to explain why I purchased, like my exact reasons. Like I walk through like my thought process of why I thought this thing was worthwhile to buy. And so it's like, you don't have to not buy anything.
And I love the fact that you're touching on some things that as a financial educator, I am so passionate about, which is bringing in that mindfulness and bringing in that awareness of what is it that you ultimately want? What is it that's actually going to make you happy? And I want to kind of circle back on your de-influencing worksheet, because when I saw you put that out, I was so excited. I was so excited because, I mean, you're calling it a de-influencing worksheet, but in my world as a financial educator, those are spending speed bumps. That's just those kind of questions to help you slow down, really think about what it is that you're bringing into your life. And so I'm going to make sure to link that in the show notes, because I think that would be a super helpful resource for a lot of folks. And it's very affordable. It's very, very affordable. And you can use it as many times as you need to.
Yeah.
But thank you for creating that resource and sharing that resource, because I do think it's so helpful for folks to start just asking better questions about their own choices and decisions. And something else that you mentioned was the topic of fast fashion. You talked about fast fashion earlier, and I wanted to ask you about this journey of ethical fashion. Like, what even is ethical fashion? Because I think it can get very convoluted, displayed as another thing to buy that's going to be more expensive than fast fashion, right?
That's a really good question. So I'm very passionate about ethical fashion. I've been passionate about just fashion for my whole life. But it's not just like I love dressing up, but I've been really interested in the behind the scenes of fashion ever since I was a young child. Watching Project Runway was sort of my first introduction to like how clothes are made and how clothes are designed. First of all, what is ethical fashion? I think that ethical fashion is like really just old school fashion. I guess that's how I would describe it. I'm really interested in learning about fashion history, and basically one of the first things you learn after learning about the changes in fashion and its production over the last century or so is that the way that we do fashion now is completely unprecedented. We have never consumed clothing this way in all of human history. It's very new. But so we go back to just the 1960s, right? And according to, I don't remember exactly where this data came from, but the average person bought about 25 items of clothing a year, or I actually believe that was the average household, 25 items. So, household includes individual households and multifamily households. It's just the average of all of that. And that's a lot less than what it is right now, which I believe for the average household is somewhere closer to 70 items of clothing per year. When we go back to the 1920s and 30s, you would buy a new dress or a suit, if you're a man, maybe once a year or once every other year. You would not even necessarily buy one. If you were well off, you'd buy a new one every year, or maybe you'd buy two every year. But the average person was buying them once every year or every other year. Shoes, you'd maybe buy once a year. It really depended on what your job was and what you did, but usually, really, it was a once a year thing. And, you would buy smaller items of clothing like socks and gloves and things like that, maybe a few times a year because those would wear out faster. At that point, more than 60% of clothing was handmade. And so only 40% of our clothing was actually coming from, at that point, it would have been a combination of tailors. And I think that at that point, like, we had just started to get like department stores. Department stores were a relatively new thing back then. But clothing was a much bigger deal because either you had to make it yourself, or you had to have a family member who knew how to sew, who made it for you, or you would go to the tailor and have them custom make you an item of clothing. It was just a much bigger deal, so people bought less. And that's how it was for most of human history. And the way that we consume clothing now, the rate at which we consume clothing, is completely unprecedented. And it gets faster and faster every single year. I think that there's, again, I don't know the exact source of this number, but there's this number I keep hearing, which is that the average item of clothing now is worn an average of 7 times before it's thrown away, which is insane to me, especially as somebody who loves fashion history. And, I love going to these, I love going to museums and seeing these old costumes and these old, artifacts. And you can see just the years and years of wear in them.
Mm-hmm.
That's how clothing has always been meant to be worn, is to be worn until you literally can't wear it anymore. And then at that point, once you literally can't wear it anymore, you turn it into something else. You either, it becomes, now it's a house dress that you only wear inside when you're doing chores, or now it's an apron. Or if it really can't be salvaged into anything, now it's rags and you use it to clean. Clothing it had a life cycle, right? And the life cycle was in terms of many years, instead of now when it really seems like for many people buying fast fashion, the life cycle is more like months.
Right. If that,
right? Like, and this is, again, like, I also really love vintage clothing. Everything I'm wearing up here is vintage right now. And so again, like, I love buying clothing that's from, 20, 40, 50 years ago. And you can see that it was built to last. That's why I love buying older clothing, not just because it's cute, but because the quality was so much higher than it is now. And another word that I really love that I have heard online is enshittification. I don't know if you heard that word, referring to
enshittification. I want to just repeat it because it's such a great word.
It's a fantastic word. I also don't know who to credit that one to, but enshittification is how everything is just getting worse, like lower quality, crappier,
right,
more cheaply made. And that's definitely,
and on purpose.
Yeah, on purpose.
Right.
Purpose, being made because it's cheaper. And that has absolutely been true of clothing. Clothing just is not made to last anymore. There has been a very purposeful drop in quality in the past 20 years in clothing on purpose. And it started with just fast fashion, but now it has reached every level of fashion. Like, people are getting like Dior bags that are kind of shit, and it is incredibly unsustainable, not just for like the planet, which it is, but also it's unsustainable on an economic level
right,
for us personally. Like, it used to be that people would save to buy items of clothing, and then they would treat those items of clothing with care and wear them for many years. People are not necessarily spending less money on clothing. People are spending like the same amount of money on clothing, getting way more of it, and it sucks. And so I am anti-fast fashion, like, in every way possible. To me, it is just antithetical to the spirit of clothing, like, as an art form, and clothing as sort of a cultural thing. Clothing is supposed to be something that brings people and their cultures together. It has always been something that, up until the 20th century, everyone on every level was involved in. Everyone knew how to fix things. Everyone knew how to darn socks. Everyone had a grandma who knew how to turn the old pillowcases into a baby onesie. Like, that used to just be a part of everyone's culture all over the world. And we are so removed now, the construction of our clothing. It's so alien to us. We don't know how to do that anymore. That's how fashion used to be versus fashion now. So to me, what is ethical fashion? To me, it's a return to that. It's treating items of clothing as not disposable,
right,
but also valuing the work and time it takes to make them, because I feel like so many people no longer like even understand that there is craftsmanship to clothing, and that, you know, I think a lot of people just have this idea that like fast fashion is just created on machines. It's not. It's sewn
Right.
by people, and all of those people are being exploited, usually in the global south. And so for me, ethical fashion means taking those people back into consideration, paying them fair wages, making sure that, you know, they're actually being paid enough to live for making the clothing that we wear. It also means making clothing that is meant to last and not just immediately go into the garbage. And then, of course, there's the sustainable aspect to it as well. Over the past, 10 or so years or 20 years, plastic fibers have been slowly creeping their way into every single like category of clothing that used to have natural fibers. Now leather is just replaced with pleather everywhere, and it drives me crazy when
Right.
they call it vegan leather. I'm like, that's not, it's plastic.
It's plastic, yes.
Okay. But like, leather's replaced by vegan leather everywhere because it's cheaper. Wool is replaced by polyester. Cotton's replaced by polyester. And that has, that's going to have huge environmental problems. That said, natural fibers are not off the hook either. There are a lot of ways in which things like cotton production can be very harmful for the environment. A lot of fabric dyes, like in the factories where fabrics are dyed, the dyes like seep into the river and pollute local waterways. Like there's so many different ways that fashion can contribute to harming the environment. So I think that people need to think about ethical fashion not as if it's a black and white issue, because trying to find the ethical item of clothing, the most ethical, is going to be a wild goose chase. Like you're just going
Right.
to like you're going to drive yourself crazy. So I think that when we're talking about ethical fashion, you need to be considering all of these things, and you need to be looking for clothing and brands that try to meet as many of those criteria as possible, right? And I think that there are a lot of brands out there that are doing really amazing things with, for example, using dead stock fabrics, or like recycling old fabrics, or even like doing things like recycling plastic bottles into, wearable polyester. Because it's like those plastic
Yeah,
bottles.
I have like a pair of jeans that has the pockets that says made with recycled bottles. I'm like, oh, that's cool.
And this is something that even individual people can do, just going to the thrift store, getting something old and just flipping it into something that's new and wearable to you, or with your own, items of clothing. But the main thing that I think not everyone, but the main thing I think a lot of people overlook when it comes to sustainable fashion is that the second most sustainable item of clothing you could possibly get in the world is something you purchased secondhand. Okay, that's the second most sustainable item of clothing. The first most sustainable item of clothing you can possibly get is the one you already own. And
Right.
so I think a lot of people think that in order to shop sustainably, you have to spend lots of money on these, really expensive sustainable brands. You don't at all. If you were to build your entire wardrobe by shopping purely at the thrift store, you would, first of all, spend less money than you would at the mall. Second of all, you would have an entirely sustainable wardrobe, because all of that clothing has got to go somewhere, and probably most of it's going to end up in a landfill. So I think that people need to always remember to bring up not just thrifting, but also upcycling and like thrift flipping when we're talking about sustainable and ethical fashion.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're bringing up these points because we're all out there just trying our best. And I appreciate that you're talking about how there is no perfect solution. So trying to aspire to the perfect solution is not really it. Like it's not going to get us where we want to go. The other thing that I am loving about this conversation is I think so many of us, again, we're chasing that dopamine hit. So if we're shifting our mindset when we're shopping from I'm chasing the dopamine hit of buying the thing, and instead the dopamine hit of finding the just right thing through secondhand shopping or whatever, that might be, that's a whole different perspective shift. And that gets, I think, folks excited when they realize, oh no, it's the thrill of the hunt, the thrill of finding that beautiful, perfect garment. But instead of looking at it on Amazon, or instead of looking at it, in Target or whatever it might be, I'm going to try to look first at a secondhand store, a thrift store, a vintage store, something like that. So That's beautiful. I love that so much. I want to circle back to influencer culture if you're okay
Mhm.
with that. Like, I kind of want to understand the behind the scenes, right? Like, how does that influencer marketing culture work? Like, how has it become as pervasive as it has? How did that process work?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I think that the answer is slowly and insidiously.
Okay.
I think that I think again back to when I was in high school. I just for reference, I graduated high school in 2016. So when I was a teenager, I remember being on Instagram, and I very much in like the fashion and makeup areas of Instagram, and I also read a lot of. This is back when people still had blogs. I read a lot
Yes.
blogs, which honestly, I wish we would bring back fashion blogs because I feel like fashion blogs, this is just a little side tangent, but I have to say this. I feel like fashion blogs are in many ways kind of the antithesis to the overconsumption influencer culture because fashion blogs are inherently slower, take longer to read. You have to sit down and actually read the words and think about things as opposed to just like seeing a picture or a quick little video and going click purchase, so that's my side note. Please bring back fashion blogs because I want to see this again. Anyway, so, that's the internet that I was on as a teenager. And I feel like I really witnessed the rise of influencer culture because I remember, when I was a teen, it was pretty rare when you'd see somebody do a brand deal. And usually it was only when they were a pretty big deal. And also it was, when you, especially with smaller, more niche creators, it was usually just they sent you a PR package and not like they're actually paying to promote it. I think that over the years, that type of content just became more and more frequent, especially with really big creators, as they realized that they could actually have very lucrative careers if they kept accepting all of this promotional work. So it just became slowly over time more and more normalized for more and more people's content to be ads, basically. And I saw somebody talking not that long ago about just the difference in makeup influencers. I remember being much more like critical, I guess, of the makeup they were wearing, much more brutally honest about it. And also like when they did a review of makeup, they would do like, all right, I got the, set of the lipsticks, whatever. Now I'm going to do a full swatch of every single lipstick color and show you exactly how it looks. And then I'm going to wear it all day and I'll be back in the evening to show you how the lipstick stayed on after
Right.
the full day. Like they were giving us really good content about like really honest reviews of makeup, and so it felt more like when they did recommend a product that was really good, it was more exciting because it was like, oh, they're being for real about it. And now makeup influencers will come on and they'll just like swatch. It's this, okay, this is my little lipstick or whatever. This is the thing that it drives me crazy. Actually, I'm gonna use my bubble gum. It's this is what they do every time. They lean into the camera and they go,
Right. Swipe it on and then
"Oh
the shock face.
God, you guys. Oh my gosh. I cannot believe how, oh my gosh, this is so, and it's like, it doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel like they're doing the same sort of like detective work, basically, that
Yeah.
they used to be doing. And so there's been that shift away from this sort of like, I am just a normal person and I am recommending stuff I actually like, towards this gradual acceptance that they're being just sent free stuff all the time. It became normalized to see these huge PR boxes for influencers. I also remember, I don't really know when haul videos started, but I definitely remember starting to see those as a teenager and already feeling kind of disgusted by them. As somebody who was saving up my babysitting money to go buy $20 worth of clothing at the thrift store, seeing these people come online and just be like, so I just casually dropped like $900 at the mall. I was just like, wow, that's just wasteful. Like, why would you need that much clothing? And so those sort of things became more normalized. And I think it really was a gradual creep. And I think it also is taking advantage of the fact that we do live in a capitalist society where how much you have physically is a measure of success and is a measure of
Right.
worth, you know.
And by capitalism, not by standards of
Exactly.
ourselves, right? But
it is ingrained in us by capitalism, how much stuff we have and how much cool stuff we have is a sign of success and of status. And so, of course, naturally, people are going to want to have these homes filled with, 50 different pairs of shoes and all these different designer dresses. If you're a man, there's influencers for, male interests as well. The ones who have
absolutely.
sports cars or, I guess I don't really know what sort of stuff.
Latest, I mean, I can speak at least from the perspective with my husband, like he gets a lot of advertising around the latest tech and,
Exactly.
a lot of, he gets clothing stuff too, because he's,
I do just
he's a little bougie with his clothing, but,
I do want to just a quick side note with that, which is I have definitely gotten like snarky comments from men on my posts before that are
interesting.
They're like, oh yeah, like only women think like this. Like only women are obsessed with shopping. And I'm like, that is incorrect, sir. Like you guys need to buy different stuff. Just because like men aren't freaking out over like, getting the new Stanley Starbucks cup, that does not mean that you guys don't have your own stuff that you are influenced into purchasing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even my nephew who is, 21, 22, that kid can see someone across the room, like, totally far away from him, and he can tell me exactly what watch they're wearing and how much it costs and what brand it is and what model it is. I think that's really what I'm hearing you say is that, it's been a slow burn to get to where we are now.
Absolutely.
And that this influencing culture and this, influencer marketing, and something that I've noticed, and maybe you have noticed too, is that a lot of folks are not even disclosing that their content is an advertisement or contains promoted products, which is illegal, not okay. But I think we're all just become so skeptical of the content that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, I have a ethical and moral, viewpoint that I don't take any affiliate marketing. I don't do brand deals. What I'm promoting is myself and my services. I think it's important to be able to disclose that and say, hey, what I'm showing you is promoted by a brand. I got, I'm getting a kickback or I'm getting something out of this. And I think what you're able to share and what you're kind of lifting the veil on is how that process is working. Because so many of us, I think, are like, this feels sketchy, but I don't know why, and I don't know how it's gotten to this point. So I appreciate you talking about that. What I really think you have such good insight on, that's just, you're so great at sharing how we can de-influence ourselves. Because like you said, it's so pervasive, it's everywhere, it's really difficult. What advice would you give someone who's like, I want to de-influence my social media. I want to like not be inundated and seeped in this culture of consumerism. How can somebody start that process?
I definitely have plenty of advice. The first and most obvious thing would be to unfollow anyone whose content is primarily based around just buying stuff. There's a lot of people, online who their whole content is, all of their videos are like, look at me preparing my meals in this beautiful kitchen with all of these amazing kitchen appliances and kitchen gadgets and stuff that I have. And it's not really about the cooking. It's more just about them plating the food. And, so some of it is more subtle like that. Some of the videos are much more, just upfront that are like, here's some amazing Amazon find, or come with me on a Target run, whatever. So that first thing would be to unfollow people like that. I'm not saying that those people are bad. I'm not saying that those channels shouldn't exist. I'm just saying that if you do want to de-influence yourself, those are the first people that you should unfollow, just to kind of cleanse your timeline of that sort of thing. The second is I love how you describe my sort of worksheet as like spending speed bumps. I think that's really smart. I think that implementing those sort of speed bumps in your own life is really helpful. you can use my worksheet if you want, or you can just do it on your own, but basically what you want to do is you want to just be asking yourself more questions before you click purchase, because so much of our culture, not just in social media, but literally everything about our world now is designed to make shopping faster and easier. Because what, these corporations and, millionaires and capitalists want is they want people to spend without thinking. That's why they push all of these things like Amazon Alexa and, these things that are like, smart assistants that basically just allow you to just speak out loud what you want to buy and then buy it. So put speed bumps in your own life. And that could be asking yourself questions, but it also could be doing things like, if you do have Amazon Echo or whatever it is they're called, maybe get rid of it, or at least just maybe turn it off. Like personally, I would get rid of it because I don't know why you would let someone wiretap your home. But, maybe just turn it off for a while. Or maybe like if you can disconnect it from your credit card and then have shopping apps on your phone. Take the shopping apps off your phone. Shopping is only for your computer now. Just like make it a little bit harder for you to buy things from the comfort of your own home. I'm not saying you have to like completely eliminate shopping online. I shop online. I still buy things online all the time. But the more steps you can put between sitting on the couch on your phone and actually pressing purchase, the more time you have to actually think about whether or not that's a thing you really need. And that's what we want. We want time. The next thing I would recommend, to make a wish list. This has been something that has been so helpful for me personally. I have a wish list. It's on Pinterest. And every time there's something that I see online that I really, really want, I just put it on the wish list. And it can be literally purchases of any size. I have on my wish list everything from like a single bottle of nail polish that I thought looked really pretty, all the way up to like a pair of designer boots that I really love and can't afford right now. Just everything. I put it on the wish list and then I let myself forget about it. And then in the future, if I do decide that I have some, extra spending money in my budget and I want to get myself something nice, I can go back to that wish list and I can purchase things from it. And what I've discovered after doing this for a few years now of just putting everything on the wish list first and then coming back to it later is that a lot of the time, I don't want that thing as much anymore in the future. That thing that I thought in the moment I wanted so badly, I come back to it a few months later and I'm like, it's not as cute as I remember, and right. And so then at that point I can be like, oh, okay, I'll just delete it off the wish list. And I haven't spent any money on it. I haven't wasted money on it at all. But if I do come back a few months later and I'm like, oh, I still want that so badly, then I can make the decision to buy it. But now I know, now it's been a while. I've forced myself to wait. And because I forced myself to wait, I've now really had time to deliberate over whether or not this is something that I really want. So definitely making a wish list has helped for me a lot. It doesn't have to be on Pinterest. It could be, on your phone. It could be a physical thing. You cut things out of magazines on, whatever works for you. But I do think that the main point of making a wish list is forcing yourself to wait to buy things. And then the last thing I would say for somebody who wants to start de-influencing themselves is to really get picky, I guess, to develop your own personal style. And I don't just mean in clothing, I mean in everything. It's for your home decor, it goes for your tech accessories, it goes for all of, everything. One of the saddest parts of the current stage of influencer culture that we're in, and also the current stage of micro trends and everything, is that everything has to become an aesthetic, a core. Everyone who wants to be fashionable can just go online and, find these pre-made aesthetics, pick one that they like, and then you have a shopping list of all the things that aesthetic, right? And because of that, it's really killing the art of developing your own personal style for a lot of people. Once you have discovered an aesthetic that is really true to you, it makes it so much easier to say no to buying things that you otherwise might have purchased. I a lot of the time will see things in the store and I'll be like, oh, that's so cute. But then I think about it and I'm like, But I have a very specific personal aesthetic, and this doesn't really fit my very specific personal aesthetic. It's a lot easier to leave those things behind.
I love all these tips about de-influencing yourself because I do think that there's so much power in taking back control and knowing that you don't have to follow what people are telling you to follow, even if it doesn't seem like all that insidious on the surface. If it seems very, innocent and like, oh, this is just people sharing and all of that stuff, it can start to permeate more deeply. And we kind of can lose sense of who we are when we're inundated with the same kind of messaging over and over and over again. So I love all these tips. I love what you're sharing. I would love for my audience to follow you and for them to know who you are and stay connected with your work. So what's the best way for people to get connected to you?
So you can follow me on TikTok. I am Cersei's Pork Roast. I also recently made a Twitter. I haven't posted a ton on there yet, but I am also Cersei's Pork Roast on Twitter. So I think those are the two blessed. I'm considering also starting to do YouTube, but I haven't really started YouTube yet, so not that quite.
Well, if people follow you on Twitter and on TikTok, I'm sure they're going to see you as soon as you're ready to launch that.
If I do start posting on YouTube, I'll be posting about it on it. But yeah, the main place to follow me would be on TikTok and on Twitter.
That's awesome. And I will make sure to leave all those links in the show notes. And thank you so much for spending time with me. And I just can't wait to share all of this great wisdom with everyone who's listening. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Meadowsweet Money podcast, a production of Meadowsweet Money LLC. This podcast is sponsored by my supporters on Patreon. For more details or to become a patron, please visit patreon.com/meadowsweetmoney. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast player. Even better, share this episode with a friend or a colleague. And be sure to hit that follow button so you never miss a single episode. The information and content provided in this podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only. It should not be considered legal or financial advice. Please consult with an attorney or other professional to determine what may be best for your individual needs. Remember, the point of this podcast is not money. Money is the vehicle for you to live your best life, because you deserve it. For more shame-free personal finance content, please visit meadowsweetmoney.com. Thank you for listening.